John Deere was no stranger to a cruel fate. When he was just 4 years old, his father boarded a ship for England and vanished forever, leaving his mother to raise him in absolute grinding poverty as a struggling tailor. John grew up watching his family scrape by on pennies. And just when he thought he had finally beaten the odds as a young man, Vermont tore his life apart again. 2 devastating fires completely reduced his blacksmith shop to ashes, leaving him drowning in catastrophic debt. In the 1830s, failing to pay your debts meant rotting in a dark debtor's prison. In utter destitution, his pride as a man was deeply, brutally wounded. So, how does a traumatized person turn absolute ruin into a $110 billion industrial empire? This is the insane story of John Deere, a tale of a man who turned his deepest trauma into absolute empire dominance and built a green and gold dynasty that completely rewrote the rules of modern history. In the early 1800s, blacksmiths were the absolute backbone of society, the master builders of tools in survival. So at just 17 years old, driven by pure necessity, John Deere entered a brutal apprenticeship, swearing to master the hammer and anvil to secure his future. And he didn't just learn the trade, he became an absolute master of it. John developed a legendary reputation across the state for his elite craftsmanship, possessing a rare, genius-level expertise in metallurgy and a unique skill for grinding and polishing iron tools until they were sharper and smoother than anyone else could manage. By his late 20s, he had finally built a respectable shop in Vermont and started a family. For the first time, he felt safe. But just when he thought he had finally beaten the odds, disaster struck not once, but twice. First, an accidental fire ripped through his shop, turning his entire livelihood and expensive inventory into charred remains. Refusing to back down, John borrowed heavily, put his reputation on the line, and spent months rebuilding from scratch. But then the unthinkable happened. A second catastrophic fire broke out, completely reducing his newly rebuilt shop to ashes once again. It was a statistical nightmare. It triggered a fierce defense mechanism inside him. Refusing to surrender to his fate at home, he swore an oath. He would build something so indispensable, so completely irreplaceable, that he would never have to flee or beg ever again. Driven by desperation, he made a ruthless, reckless gamble. Leaving his wife and young children behind in Vermont, he scraped together his last few dollars, grabbed a small set of blacksmith tools, and secretly boarded a wagon to flee into the wild Midwest. He needed to prove he was the best blacksmith alive. He needed to survive and bring his family out west. And right on cue, the prairie gave him the perfect enemy. See, thousands of pioneer farmers were flooding into the Midwest with dreams of striking it rich. But the moment their plows hit the ground, they struck a nightmare. Back east, the soil was sandy and light. But the Midwestern prairie, it was thick, heavy, saturated, black, sticky clay. It was absolute torture. Every few yards, the wet clay would stick to the traditional cast iron and wooden plows like literal glue. The horses would stall. The farmer would have to stop, climb down, and manually scrape the muck off the blade. Exhausted and defeated, families were actually packing up to abandon their homesteads. The American dream in the West was dying. Now, every other blacksmith in the area saw a basic hustle: charge a few cents to sharpen and repair those broken plows. But John's stubborn artisan pride refused to let a tool surrender to the dirt. He didn't want a quick fix. He wanted absolute market dominance. Then came 1837, the Eureka moment. While visiting a local mill, John's eyes locked onto a broken, discarded steel saw blade. And right then and there, the breakthrough idea that would fundamentally change American agriculture forever flashed through his mind. He thought, if the blade shines like a mirror, the sticky clay will just slide right off as the plow moves. If the tool cleans itself, the farmer never has to stop. John took that old saw blade back to his anvil, hammered it into a precisely calculated curve, and spent hours polishing it until he could see his own reflection. He took this strange contraption to a nearby farm for a live test. And it worked. The steel plow sliced through the killer clay like a hot knife through butter. The muck just rolled right off. This wasn't just a successful product. For a man terrified of going broke, it was his golden ticket. Nobody wanted anything else. John Deere had just built his ultimate shield against poverty. But a broke blacksmith working alone in a tiny forge couldn't bankroll a revolution. To scale this game-changing invention, John needed serious capital and infrastructure. So, in 1843, he partnered up with a wealthy local businessman named Leonard Andrus. Together, they founded the town's first proper plow factory and Grand Detour. John finally had the financial backing to turn his prototype into a commercial powerhouse. John Deere's plow operated so flawlessly for one simple reason. It was ground and polished to such an extreme finish that it literally eliminated the friction of the mud. And in today's attention economy, YouTube works the exact same way. High-quality, deeply researched historical epics, like this one, constantly have to fight through the friction of the algorithm, clogged up by a non-stop wave of sensationalized short-form clickbait. So, to help the YouTube algorithm self-clean your feed and deliver more of these deep-dive business epics straight to you, take just 1 second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Think of it as helping us polish our own steel plow. Now, with John Deere's invention absolutely dominating the open fields, this stubborn blacksmith faced a massive new revolution. How does a single artisan rewrite the rules of an entire global industry? With his revolutionary steel plow absolutely crushing the local competition, John Deere was finally making money. But for a man haunted by the ghost of total financial ruin, making money wasn't nearly enough. He didn't just want a successful local blacksmith shop. He wanted an unassailable empire. And that meant completely burning down the traditional rules of 19th century business. Back in the 1830s, the entire manufacturing world operated on a very simple, very safe model. Transactional custom orders. A farmer would walk into a shop, say what he needed, and only then would the blacksmith fire up the forge to build it. It was slow, it was inefficient, but it was safe. No financial risk. John Deere looked at this outdated system and basically said, forget that. He chose to make a massive, deeply aggressive gamble that shocked his peers. He introduced a concept called speculative manufacturing. Instead of waiting around for orders to trickle in, Deere decided to build plows in massive quantities before anyone even asked for them. He would manufacture hundreds of plows ahead of time, stack them outside his shop, and rely on the sheer, undeniable superiority of his product to force the market to buy them. Think about it. In an era where cash was incredibly tight, overproducing inventory without guaranteed buyers was seen as pure business suicide. But to John, waiting on customers was a luxury he couldn't afford. Speed was survival. And this ruthless drive for speed didn't mean he was willing to cut corners. In fact, it was the exact opposite. John was totally obsessively maniacal about product quality. He understood that the only thing protecting him from slipping back into poverty was his brand's flawless reputation. As the business grew, his early financial partner, Leonard Andrus, started pushing back. Andrus looked at the books and complained that John was spending way too much time and money constantly tweaking and upgrading a product that was already selling perfectly fine. John's response? It became the definitive soul of the company. He looked straight at his partner and declared, "I will never sign my name to a product that does not have in it the best that is in me." To John, any drop in quality was an invitation for a competitor to destroy him. For him, perfectionism wasn't a choice, it was a survival strategy. And pretty soon, this fundamental clash in business philosophy with Andrus forced John to make another brutal, unforgiving choice. By 1848, the little town of Grand Detour was becoming a massive bottleneck. It lacked proper water power, it lacked decent access to raw materials. And most importantly, it was completely cut off from major transportation lines. John realized that if he stayed there to maintain a comfortable partnership, his dream would eventually suffocate and die. So he did something incredibly cold. He walked away from Andrus, packed up his entire life, and abruptly relocated his operations to Moline, Illinois. Why Moline? Simple strategy. It sat right along the Mississippi River. This wasn't just a change of scenery, it was a masterful play for global supply chain dominance. The river gave him unlimited water power to run a heavy industrial factory, and it unlocked cheap, lightning-fast shipping routes straight into the heart of the American West. But John still had one glaring, massive bottleneck holding him back. The United States simply didn't possess a steel industry capable of producing the ultra-high-quality, uniform steel plates he desperately needed to scale his plows. Most American steel at the time was inconsistent, fragile, and rough. So, John made an incredibly audacious, expensive move. He bypassed the entire American market altogether and looked across the Atlantic. He negotiated a massive, highly complex contract with legendary steel manufacturers in Sheffield, England, to custom roll special heavy steel plates and ship them across the ocean, down the rivers, straight to his doorstep in Illinois. It was an absolute logistical nightmare for the mid-1800s. The costs were astronomical, and the risks of shipments sinking or getting delayed were terrifying. But the gamble paid off spectacularly. By 1855, just 7 years after moving to a riverbank in Moline, John Deere's factory wasn't just a local shop anymore. They were pumping out and selling over 10,000 highly polished British steel plows every single year. The former bankrupt fugitive from Vermont had successfully scaled a premium monopoly. He was finally untouchable. Or at least, he thought he was. By 1857, John Deere was on top of the world. He had built an absolute monopoly out of sheer stubbornness. Until the entire American economy suddenly choked. It's known as the Panic of 1857, one of the most brutal, unforgiving financial sops in U.S. history. Out of nowhere, the domestic banking system collapsed. Railroad companies went bankrupt overnight, and the core demographic keeping John Deere alive, the frontier farmers, they were completely wiped out. Crop prices plummeted to practically zero. Suddenly, the people who desperately needed John's plows couldn't even afford to put food on their own tables, let alone pay off their equipment bills. The cash completely dried up. John Deere's business was suddenly buried under a mountain of uncollectible debt. And right here, the ghost of his past came back with a vengeance. Remember that 32-year-old bankrupt Thoren fleeing Vermont in the dead of night to escape a debtor's prison? That terrifying trauma never truly left him. Watching his empire bleed cash triggered an absolute panic. His artisan defense mechanism kicked in, but this time it was completely wrong for the situation. John's instinct was to run a survival play, freeze production, hoard whatever cash was left, and aggressively cut down the business to protect against the creditors. It was a classic scarcity mindset. But in a massive macroeconomic crisis, that kind of turtle strategy is a death sentence. If you stop moving, your supply chain suffocates, your market share vanishes, and you go under anyway. John Deere was trapped by his own psychological scars. He was brilliant at shaping steel, but he was completely out of his depth dealing with a modern, complex financial meltdown. So he had to make the most painful decision of his entire life. He had to swallow his immense, legendary pride and step aside. In 1858, John officially transferred the day-to-day operations of the company to his 21-year-old son, Charles Deere. Talk about a brutal, high-stakes passing of the torch. John was a raw, self-made street fighter who learned business at the anvil. Charles was part of the new breed. He was highly educated, analytical, and trained in macroeconomics and finance at a proper commercial college. And the contrast in their strategy was immediate. When John wanted to hide, Charles did something incredibly ballsy. He went on the offensive. Charles looked at the broke farmers and realized that if he repossessed their plows, the company would inherit worthless metal and lose customers forever. So, instead, he extended their credit. He gave them more time to pay. Next, he completely re-engineered how the company sold its products by establishing a network of regional branch houses, independent corporate-backed distribution hubs across the Midwest. This radical move allowed the factory to bypass expensive middlemen, keep a direct pulse on what farmers actually needed, and provide local parts and service. It was an absolute masterstroke. By doubling down on customer loyalty and fixing the macro distribution, Charles didn't just save the company from bankruptcy, he built a fortress. When the smoke cleared and the American Civil War broke out, John Deere wasn't just surviving, they were poised to become the undisputed trillion-pound gorilla of global agriculture. John Deere remained the iconic, quality-obsessed soul of the brand, but it was his son's cold financial genius that turned a local blacksmith's hustle into a corporate dynasty. In 1886, John Deere passed away in Moline, Illinois, at 82 years old. The man who had entered the Midwest as a desperate, broke fugitive fleeing a debtor's prison died a prominent political figure, a beloved philanthropist, and an absolute titan of American industry. He left behind a company that wasn't just surviving, it was completely woven into the fabric of global food production. But what's the real takeaway here? Why are farmers today still fiercely loyal to a brand created 2 centuries ago? Why do they willingly drop $500,000 on a single piece of machinery painted in green and gold? It all goes back to that fanatical decision made by a stubborn blacksmith over his anvil in 1837. John's refusal to compromise on quality wasn't just a marketing slogan, it was a survival mechanism. He knew that the moment his tool failed, his shield against poverty broke, that trauma forged a corporate DNA so strong that even a global economic collapse couldn't shatter it. It took John's obsession with perfection and his son Charles's cold financial brilliance to build a fortress that outlasted the test of time. John Deere's real legacy isn't the steel plows, the massive factories, or the high-tech tractors. It's that unyielding artisan pride, an ironclad self-respect hammered deep into every single piece of green machinery. And that is how you turn a desperate escape from ruin into an immortal multi-billion-dollar dynasty.